What is more apparent, however, is the danger of withholding information that might be diagnostically important. It is a fact that some diseases have higher rates of incidence within certain ethnic groups, as compared with the human population as a whole. Native Americans of the Pima tribe have a particular propensity to type 2 diabetes. African Americans are much more likely to suffer from sickle cell anemia than Irish Americans. Cystic fibrosis affects mainly people of Northern European origin. Tay-Sachs is much more common among Ashkenazi Jews than others. This is not fascism, racism, or the unwelcome intrusion of Big Brother. This is simply a matter of making the best possible use of whatever information is available. For such a young science, genetics has played a central role in a remarkable number of notably ugly political episodes. Eugenics, as we have seen, was partly of the geneticist's own making. The pseudoscience known as Lysenkoism, which flourished in the Soviet Union in the middle of the 20th century, however, was visited upon genetics from on high. Literally, Stalin had plenty to say on the matter. Lysenkoism represents the most egregious incursion of politics into science since the Inquisition. In the late 1920s, the Soviet Union was still finding its feet. Stalin had won the Battle of Succession after Lenin's death and was consolidating power. The collectivization of agriculture was underway, and in an obscure agricultural research station in distant Azerbaijan, an uneducated but ambitious peasant was making a name for himself. Trofim Lysenko, born in the Ukraine in 1898, appeared an unlikely choice to oversee Stalin's agricultural revolution. Barely literate, he was working as a minor technician at Ganja, at the Ordzhonikidze Central Plant Breeding Experiment Station, when, in 1927, he was catapulted from obscurity by a visiting Pravda correspondent, who, perhaps at a loss for a good copy, was inspired by the sight of Lysenko. Here was the barefoot professor solving agricultural problems so that the local Turkic peasant can live through the winter without trembling at the thought of the morrow. Critically, the article painted Lysenko as a problem solver, not a highfalutin academic. He didn't study the hairy legs of fruit flies, but went to the root of things. The image of the barefoot professor was irresistible to Soviet apparatchiks. Here was the son of the soil, the true flowering of the Soviet man, of the rural peasant class. His agricultural intuition was surely worth more than all the book learning of the shiftless intellectuals. Not to disappoint, Lysenko was quick to capitalize on his newfound prominence by proposing that winter wheat be vernalized. Winter wheat is normally planted in the fall. It overwinters as a shoot, with some of the crop perishing, the rest maturing during the spring. Through vernalization, Lysenko suggested the losses of winter could be avoided. He claimed that you could fool the wheat seeds into germinating in the spring simply by chilling and wetting them, and that increased yields would be achieved in the bargain. The definitive experimental demonstration of the method was carried out by none other than Lysenko's father in his own fields. Indeed, the yield was some 3 times greater than that of conventional unvernalized wheat planted in the same district. Vernalization did not, in fact, originate with Lysenko. Wherever he may have picked it up, the procedure dates back to the preceding century at least, appearing, for example, in the Ohio agricultural literature of the 1850s. But here Lysenko's lack of education, and therefore ignorance of what had been accomplished elsewhere, stood him in good stead when it came to claiming originality. The same, however, could not be said for every further attempt to apply the method, whose results can vary a good deal, depending on local conditions, something the Ohio farmers knew, but the barefoot professor apparently did not. Within a couple of years, Beset by failures, Lysenko stopped advocating the vernalization of winter wheat and was pushing instead the vernalization of spring wheat, a ploy worthy of the sharpest Soviet satire, considering that the crop is indeed named after the season in which it is normally planted. Later, his wheat yield policy did another U-turn, when Lysenko called for warming instead of cooling the seed prior to planting. Wheat vernalization was but one of many agricultural nostrums that Lysenko peddled, but it illustrates well his overall strategy. A complete disregard for expert knowledge was de rigueur, as was a refusal to conduct consistent and rigorous tests. Essentially, any idea intuitively appealing to Lysenko was good enough to be implemented. What scientific method he did espouse almost seems inspired by theological reasoning, odd coming from the tool of a godless communist state. In order to obtain a certain result, you must want to obtain precisely that result. If you want to obtain a certain result, you will obtain it. Much more astutely reasoned was Lysenko's careful manipulation of the media. His original brush with fame in Pravda had taught him that the state-controlled press was a better venue for scientific self-promotion than the dusty pages of academic or trade journals. In 1929, Pravda twice featured the barefoot professor's success with vernalization, each time reporting in loving detail the down-home contribution of Lysenko Sr. At that point, the Soviet Union needed a Lysenko. The agricultural reorganization, as Stalin preferred to call the collectivization of farms, was proving a catastrophe. Even the official estimates, notorious for their rosy overstatements, painted a grim picture of rural productivity during this period. Lysenko's intuitive quick fixes made him the man of the hour, even if they wound up doing more harm than good the morning after. He embodied an important Bolshevist ideal, Deystvennost, action quality. No messing around with grand theories or arcane academic concerns. Lysenko, the can-do barefoot professor, was all about action and solving practical problems. Lysenko learned quickly how to play the Soviet system. His lectures made no pretense to being scientific in any sense that we would recognize. They consisted instead of ideological rants, peppered with all the Marxist-Leninist jargon du jour. Small wonder Stalin was a fan, leading the standing ovation at a Congress of Collective Farm Shock Brigade workers, with cries of, "Bravo, Comrade Lysenko!" In return, Lysenko astutely named his latest big idea, a variety of branched wheat, for Stalin. Happily accepting the honor, the Generalissimo fortunately never found out that the branched wheat was another bust. Though inherently higher in yield, it requires such low-density planting as to more than offset the advantage of its multiple seed heads.